Hey, welcome back. This is the fourth part of making the sheath for the Cobra knife. In this video, we're going to look at positioning the pocket for the sharpening stones and the fire steel. Right here, what I'm doing is just marking it out on the front of the sheath where we're going to actually mount it. Drawing a couple little lines just to keep everything nice and straight. And I'm using a 3mm hole punch to punch all of the holes. What I did when marking it out was actually add about 2.5mm, 3mm outside of the size of the sharpening stones. That'll give me a little bit of room to fold the leather. It's about the thickness of the leather is what I use. So this actually now, I'm just counting, making sure that I actually get the right number of holes. And now we need to actually create a flap that goes over the front of the pocket. So I'm just using a scrap piece of leather, measuring it from the size of the pocket, and I'm drawing out something that's going to look reasonable. It'll have a little tab that'll slip underneath a strap to keep it closed. And I'm going to end up using, once I get this cut, I'll pull out one of my chisels to actually just give it a little bit of style. Nice cornered cut. That way it'll flow down, no sharp edges to get caught on anything. What I'm cutting on are these cool little gel pads I found on Amazon. I'll throw a link in them. They're nice. I used to use magazines, but I'd end up with little magazine pieces all over the place. These are just gel pads that are like the self-healing mat, but you can actually use your hole punch on them without damaging your self-healing mat, which are a lot more expensive. So what I just did there is I skived all of the edges so that they're nice and smooth. And now I'm just marking on the sheath where the top pocket strap will go. Next up comes cutting out the back of the sheath. I'm actually putting the finished side of the leather out because the strap is going to work that way. I actually traced the cutout sheath as opposed to my template just to make sure I get something of the exact size. Here I'm still using the 7 to 9 ounce leather, using my chisels for all of the corners so I get a uniform radius and a nice even cut. And a nice even radius across the top. I'll use the straight edge to cut out the straight pieces, just going from the edge of the corner cuts. And then I'll take it off, and where I traced out the line before, I'm just dragging the knife. It's heavy leather, so it doesn't cut the smoothest. And now I have a front and a back. Next up, I'm going to actually set the belt loop. I'm targeting a 2-inch belt that it'll be able to fit around. So I've just made a little tab mark across the top where I can actually add some stitching. Measuring 2 inches, a little bit extra for the fold. Usually I try and go about 3 times the width of the leather, whatever that happens to be. And now I'll just put some stitching marks across the front. It's really important to make sure you get the same number of stitches in both places. And now I'm just marking off a radius because we'll put stitching all the way around that as well. So it comes out pretty close. In order to line things up, what I'm going to do is just use a couple pins or a couple needles and make sure the holes line up, and then I'm going to transfer the holes from the arc of the tab to the arc of the strap. That way I'm going to ensure I get the same stitching pattern and I'm not trying to stab through 2 layers of leather. So I'm actually using just a sharp needle at this point in one of the stitching punches. And now I'm just punching over the holes that I marked so they have exactly the same pattern and same holes. Here I'm skiving the back of the tab. The reason I'm doing that is so you get a nice smooth fit. When it's folded over, you don't have a rough edge that's running up against your leg or your belt or anything else. So I'm gonna go down pretty thin, and now I get a nice tight fit. Again, cleaning up the edges. It's really important to do this always, to clean up the edges so that you get a nice burnished finish. Otherwise, that sharp edge of the leather will eventually catch on things and start looking real ratty and shatty. Now I have to put the holes around the outside, so I'm using a groover that I've set to just cut a groove into the leather. That'll provide my stitching line. And I'm running just a handheld groover over all of the other stitching lines so that the stitches are actually recessed. That way you can't catch a stitch with the edge of the knife. It won't wear on your pants. Same thing, this is the really important one, on the back of the sheath where the pocket stitching is going to go in. I want to make sure that stitching is actually recessed into those grooves so the knife won't catch it as it's being drawn and sheathed. And it's just back to tracing the line out. The nice thing is once you've done all this, effectively you have a knife sheath kit from IKEA. We have the top and the back. Now I'm just kind of trimming things up a little bit, marking all the holes where they're going to go through to the back of the sheath. And again, I'm doing that with just a prick so that as I stab down in each hole, it'll leave a little mark on the leather, and then I can simply go back and make sure I line up all my holes. That way I get a nice straight punch. I find if I try and go through 2 or 3 layers of leather, what ends up happening is I never get straight through. The leather starts to deform. And as it starts to deform, I get a real ugly stitch on the back because some of it went through straight, some of it went through on an angle. So by doing this, I'm making sure that most of my stitching is going to go straight through the leather. I haven't found any alignment problems doing this. You just have to make sure you're always on your little marks. So the next step I need to do is actually cut out the welt. So what I did is simply cut out one piece, just like the front of the sheath. And now I'm just cutting out the welt, which is just a tracing from the knife. And it'll give me a one-piece welt. I should point out, the welt is bigger than it needs to be. The reason I leave it bigger is once I get it all sewn together, I'm actually going to trim off the excess. If I try and make it exact, I have to be real careful on my gluing to make sure the edges are all lining up. And the edge to me that is the most important is that top edge. So that's going to be my master, if you will. When I glue and stitch everything together, I'm going to do a final trimming of those edges to the top piece, which is the piece everybody sees. So now I've got a welt. And the last thing I'll need, I see I already cut it out and didn't manage to get it on video, but there's a little piece that'll go on the back of the sheath that'll actually create a ridge for the guard of the knife to sit in. It's literally just traced from the top of the front piece. So there's a front piece and a back piece, but then the knife will actually sheath into and sit on top of those ridges, giving you a nice, snug, secure fit. At the end, we end up with pieces like this. Next video will actually show the staining of it. If you like this, please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for when the next one comes out.